Well, this is weirdly fortuitous. Barely a week after my video examining whether or not Baraggan really deserved to be the Primera espada over Stark, Kubo goes and practically gives us an answer as part of his Klub outside Q&A. Alright, in typical Kubo fashion, it's not quite as cut and dry as that, but it's a fascinating insight nonetheless, and one that really does put the espada rankings, certainly those top few, into perspective somewhat. Now, usually this would have been included in one of our Klub Outside Q&A roundup videos, but since I just made a video looking at Baraggan not that long ago in this exact context, I figured I'd dedicate a video to Stark's side of things as well, so it can act as something of a part 2 to that earlier upload. After all, it's only fair. I've discussed before how I feel Stark is criminally underrated, even now. Yes, Baraggan's Respirar is a truly monstrous, and as he calls it, an absolute ability, godlike even, but I'd argue Stark's true power falls into a similar camp, but it often goes overlooked. You see, Stark has the total opposite problem to Baraggan: perception. Perception of Baraggan is amazing because he outwardly exudes power and authority. His very design is that of a regal tyrant with control over death itself. And so, as a reader, you look upon this skeleton garbed in shadow and fur and adorned with a jewel-encrusted crown, and you think, well, this guy clearly deserved to be number one. We also get a lot of face time with Respirar as an ability, and we learned to fear it through Kubo's clever build-up. I've said it before that as a terrifying force of nature, Baraggan peaked when he took Soifon's arm. That remains his best moment as a villain, and possibly the best moment of any of the top 3 Espada. It's really the only time where they felt genuinely threatening and frightening as an enemy faction. And well, Stark never quite got that moment. And of course, in a sense, that is by design. Stark is extremely laid back and lacks any drive or need to prove himself whatsoever, similar to characters like Gremmy, and perhaps even Aizen too, to some degree. But Stark's perception issues run even deeper than that, to the point where people tend to miss the true nature of what he's really capable of. Well, Kubo has now taken some unlikely steps towards setting the record straight. And in today's video, we're going to take a look at his answer and what it means for the wider discussion about who's really fit to hold the title of the Primera Espada. However, before we get started on today's video, if by the end of the video you enjoyed it and you want to see more from the channel, then please do hit subscribe, as it really does help me out and I would greatly appreciate it. So then, the misconceptions of Stark. Really, the biggest issue surrounding the perception of Stark is the fact that he predominantly fights using Sero. Despite Stark's Sero capabilities being incredibly impressive and versatile, in Kyoraku's own words, at the end of the day, all he's doing is firing a Sero. And to a lot of people, that's just not that impressive. Sure, Sero Metroletta is a completely overwhelming ability, the scariest use of Sero I think we've ever seen, one that even Kyoraku felt he needed to use bankai against in order to overcome. But in a visual medium like Bleach, when laid out on the page before us, something is definitely missing. The wow factor isn't there, that one moment that would have made Stark feel just as threatening as Baraggan. And while it sounds superfluous, the truth is it's more important than you might think. However, the hints are there from the very beginning, from the moment he uses his Resurrection essentially, that Stark is holding back his true strength. Kyoraku muses that Stark can fire something else from his guns, and while Stark flatly denies it, Kyoraku thinks he's lying. And remember, Kyoraku is one of the most perceptive characters in the entire series. If he sees something in someone, the likelihood is it's actually there. Now, in some ways, though, Starrk's not actually lying here. He's just slightly altering the truth. Starrk's true power doesn't come from his guns, but from his bandoliers. It's the ammo he's kept sequestered away until the moment he truly needs it. Starrk's true ability, his Respirar equivalent, I guess, is the power to split his soul endlessly, constantly and effortlessly creating new versions of himself in the form of his Lupine Legion, his army of flame-like wolves that explode on contact with the enemy. But again, the issue of perception remains. We only see this power in action for a single chapter, as opposed to Respirar, which runs the gamut, and against characters that, frankly, in all honesty, we're just not all that attached to. In the space of just one chapter, Starrk ruthlessly overpowers and almost kills both Love and Rose, without even moving an inch. Technically, Starrk comes out on top over his adversaries far quicker than Baraggan did, and with minimal effort. But this ability to split one's soul simply isn't revered in the same way as Respirar when it absolutely should be. It appears too late into the fight. It lasts for too short a time, and is used against characters to which the audience doesn't have that much of a connection. Also, it's lacking that visceral feeling that Respirar has. Again, Bleach is a visual medium, and actually seeing Soifon's arm rotting to the bone simply leaves much more of a lasting impression than Starrk creating an army of wolves, no matter how cool that actually is. Imagine for a moment if either Kyoraku or Ukitake were forced to face down an endless barrage of exploding wolves, causing one of them or both of them to be beaten, bloodied, and burned, and to finally use bankai. Pushed to the absolute edge by this incredible power that really only the Primera espada could possibly ever use, a senior captain realises he has no other choice. That would have been a fitting response to Starrk's power. I don't know how much more I can really emphasise this. To be able to split your soul constantly like this in Bleach simply is not normal. Not only does Starrk rip his soul apart without even moving an inch or breaking a sweat, but he does so while retaining his own form and power. He creates fully living, breathing, thinking versions of himself in the form of these wolves, and can do so without limit, each wolf packing enough power to explode in a towering column of fire that frankly dwarfs the Karakura town skyline. Like I said, Starrk doesn't break a sweat throughout any of this, and while flashiness and visuals are not necessarily an indicator of power, adding all of this together does convey the ultimate package. It does showcase that Starrk's ability is unlike anything we've ever seen. In my opinion, this is indicative of an endless well of Reryoku, on the level of someone like Kenpachi, someone like Aizen, the very top tier of power in Bleach. So while on the surface Kubo built Baraggan up to feel like he should have been the number one, there's no denying Starrk's power, and his backstory has always reinforced this. Before we move on, let's take a look at what Kubo was asked regarding Starrk and how he responded. Just why has this answer prompted people to begin looking at Starrk differently once again? As always, a big thank you to M Shadows for translating this question and answer. It is greatly appreciated. So the reader asked Kubo the following question, and it is quite a lengthy one. I have a question regarding Starrk. How strong is he actually? I can't imagine him having higher killing power than Baraggan in terms of special ability, so does that mean he's superior when it comes to Reiatsu? Also, regarding the timing of him joining Aizen's forces, judging from the way it was depicted, it appears that he joined the Espada after Aizen had already acquired the Hogyoku. If so, then 1. His Reiatsu was so strong prior to splitting that even someone of Aizen's class couldn't detect it, or 2. Aizen had sensed it, but considering his strength it could have been difficult to deal with him, so I assume that Aizen decided to simply leave him be until the situation had settled. I really like Starrk, but he doesn't appear much, and I have little hope that he will return in any future media. So, I would like to know more about him. First of all, props to this person for seriously going all in on squeezing multiple questions in there all at once, while also driving it home that it's a shame that Starrk likely isn't coming back. Again, this is one of those questions that I'm legitimately surprised to see Kubo answer. And anyway, here's what Kubo had to say, and I warn you, it's not exactly in depth. It's number 2. I think Stark's charm is that he's a guy who's difficult to read. So, Kubo is confirming that the answer is indeed number 2. Aizen sensed Stark's enormous power, likely back when he was conquering Waco Mundo from right under Baraggan's nose, though we don't have a concrete timescale for that, but decided that Stark's immense strength could have been difficult to deal with. The way the reader phrases their question and how Kubo chooses to answer seems to imply that it was Starrk and Lillinet's original mysterious form that Aizen could sense, before they split into the beings we see in the present day. This is another of those answers where you'd be forgiven for thinking that Kubo just went with the theory presented to him by the question. However, here I don't think that's entirely fair. For one thing, Stark's true past, beyond what we actually get to see in the original chapter, has always been incredibly mysterious. We know that he and Lilinet were once one being, an all-powerful Vasto Lorde whose Reiatsu was so overwhelming that their mere presence was enough to kill every hollow around them. While we never see this shadowy form, we do see the ruinous effect it had on hollow life around them. Starrk and Lilinet are surrounded by enormous piles of bodies, hollow corpses laid bare for all to see. This was always a slightly weird image in my opinion, but I guess it kind of makes sense. It implies that the first thing Starrk and Lilinet did after splitting from one another was to pile up the bodies of those they had killed previously, but I mean, that's a hell of a lot of hollows. They must have been really popular back in the day if they were supposedly their friends. But then, how did they even coexist at all? You'd think after the first few hollows broke down and died just by being near them, none would approach them again. Unless the original Stark's power was so great that it killed hollows that weren't even particularly close. I've also always wondered about this. While Starrk and Lilinet's original form is a mystery to us, they do activate Resurrection by becoming one again. So is Los Lobos not a version of their original form? They are, as Starrk said, releasing their true power by becoming one body again. So I've always kind of wondered that, if maybe their original form isn't quite as big a mystery as we think. But anyway, going back to the question and answer, there's also the fact that the answer was never going to be possibility number 1 out of these two that the reader gave. Even if the original version of Starrk is the most powerful hollow to have ever lived, and it could very well be based on the fact that Aizen didn't want to challenge him, in order for Aizen to not be able to sense him at all, Starrk would need to be transcendent, and he isn't. Even the strongest Vasto Lorde in history would still be only a hollow at the end of the day, just one piece of the hybrid puzzle. Anyway, let's dive a little deeper into what this really means. Stark's backstory has always been fascinating to me. It definitely feels like one of the more mysterious stories from one of the darker corners of the Bleach world that's been left mostly untold. We don't get to see a lot, but Aizen approaches both Stark and Lilinet after discovering they have seemingly killed hundreds upon hundreds of hollows all by themselves. What I like most about answers like the one we're looking at today is the way they help to recontextualize certain story beats in a way that makes sense. For example, Aizen has always seemed, to me, well, not quite himself in this flashback. He's almost a different person to the Aizen who confronts Baraggan. There, an Aizen that feels a lot more like the Aizen we mostly know, arrogant, manipulative, and condescending. Aizen clearly sees Baraggan as someone he can humiliate, someone he can rob everything from, someone that's not a threat, and he does just that. With Baraggan calling himself the King of Waco Mundo, he was an easy target for Aizen, and a necessary one to overcome. Stark exists in a totally different space. He simply wants to be, and he keeps to himself. When Aizen approaches him, unlike with Baraggan, you can tell he is keeping his distance, both physically and figuratively as well. There's a sense that Aizen feels perhaps a little uncharacteristically uneasy when approaching Stark. He doesn't have any of his trademark swagger nor his manipulative silver tongue. In fact, when Stark points out how strong Aizen seems, Aizen merely replies with a simple, "Who knows?" This whole situation feels completely reversed from what happened with Baraggan. Aizen here seems almost respectful, like he doesn't want to step on anyone's toes. It's interesting to note as well that he comes alone this time, perhaps because Stark deserves his undivided attention, but more likely because he doesn't want to possibly provoke Stark by outnumbering him. It could also be to highlight the similarities between the two of them, how alone they both feel due to their isolating yet immense power. When I made my Waco Mundo timeline video, I noted that it was clear that Stark was likely the very last espada added to Aizen's army, hence Aizen's outfit at the time. This look of his is from just after he leaves the Soul Society at the very start of the Rankar arc, when he's still wearing a Shinigami Shihakusho but underneath his iconic white coat. The fact that Aizen supposedly waited to confront Stark because he sensed his power is very cool. I wonder what the person asking the question means by waiting until the situation had settled. Does that mean Aizen waited to ensure he had total control over Waco Mundo and the Rankar, or until after he had made his true intentions known to the Soul Society? It really seems like Aizen didn't want any distractions when meeting Stark, implying that he was truly concerned about this original Vasto Lorde's power. I also have to wonder then if Aizen was at all disappointed by what Stark became by the time he did find him. Perhaps not, since he still gave him the rank of Primera. What's both funny and interesting to me is that in the question posed, the reader talks about both lethality and Reiatsu in relation to the Espada rankings, and doesn't even bring up Stark's aspect of death, truly showing just how all over the place discord about the rankings has really become. Another interesting point to look at is the way Kubo notes that one of Stark's charms is how hard he is to read. I wonder if this is in relation to Aizen specifically. Aizen is a master of guile, of manipulating people, and of knowing what buttons to press to get the reaction he wants. But if Stark is someone that even Aizen himself can't read and can't quite understand, then it makes sense for Aizen to be wary of him. Aizen essentially sought after Stark without knowing what he'd find at the end of the path, without knowing how Stark would react. And in the end, it just turned out, much to Aizen's luck and benefit, that Stark wanted allies as powerful as he, and that's kind of what Aizen was after as well. So then, if even Aizen sensed the original Stark's power and decided it would have been difficult to deal with, just how strong does this make this mysterious Vasto Lord? And what does it mean for the question of Stark versus Baraggan? Well, as speculated before, it means that Stark has a vast amount of rare Ryoku, and that much is obvious just from his power to split his soul. But the Espada's original form, assuming it's not essentially just his resurrection, likely had so much more. Aizen confronted Baraggan during his time as a captain of the Gotei 13, meaning he didn't actually have Urahara's Hogyoku yet. He already had his own, as we see him making it before he's even a vice captain, but it was a total failure until he stole Kisuke's at the end of the Soul Society arc. So this is purely Shinigami Aizen going to meet the King of Waco Mundo, which perhaps explains why he brought backup in the form of Gin and Tosen. Still though, Aizen was convinced that he could overthrow Baraggan with this level of power, and of course he succeeds. An important point to remember is that Baraggan has a personality that is very susceptible to Aizen's trickery. He is volatile, power-hungry, and mad, and in that volatility lies predictability. Baraggan is inherently predictable, and Aizen likely knew exactly how to weaken and manipulate him to get the desired effect, which is to enrage him and force him into submission. While Baraggan might appear extremely powerful and dangerous on the outside, and don't be fooled, he absolutely is. This isn't to take away from Baraggan at all. Stark is even more dangerous to someone like Aizen, who meticulously plans out their every move, because he isn't predictable, he can't be accounted for. Perhaps the easiest way then to try and gauge the original Stark's power is to look at it in the context of the Waco Mundo that we see in the present day, by which I mean the Arrancar arc. In terms of raw power, Stark's original form seems to be leagues above every other Espada that we've seen in the source material, though again it's difficult to say for sure, and we'll get into why in a minute. Remember, the Espada only functioned as a group because they were forcibly held together by Aizen's raw strength, meaning not a single one of them could threaten him, and certainly not individually. This is reinforced when Aizen betrays Harabel, noting that he didn't expect the Espada's powers to be so far beneath his own. What throws this moment into question, however, is that at this point in the story, Aizen does have and is fused with the Hogyoku, so he's already kind of on his way to evolving. That being said, Shinigami Aizen must have been stronger than the majority of the Espada if he personally went to conquer and defeat Baraggan, who at the time would have likely have been one of, if not the strongest Espada of the group. But this doesn't seem to be the case with the original Vasto Lorde that became Stark and Lilinet. If Aizen had managed to successfully recruit that version of the Primera, then we'd be looking at a Hollow who could rival or even exceed Aizen's own strength, at least prior to the Hogyoku, which of course would be a danger to his rule. Don't forget too that we see Baraggan interacting with other Hollows, and their existence remains perfectly intact around him. Were that the original Stark sitting on this throne instead, those Hollows would have all been killed simply by being near him. So it's clear that the original Stark was far above Baraggan in terms of his strength, or at least in terms of his latent spirit energy, and in my opinion was likely the single strongest Hollow in existence. When Aizen finally decided to approach Stark, he likely still sensed some of that incredible power within. The thing is though, we don't know how much power Stark and Lilinet forfeit by deciding to split into two. Regardless, Starrk's Raryoku is clearly virtually limitless, even in the present day. I saw a comment on Reddit, unfortunately I can't remember where or who wrote it sadly, but they said that they thought in terms of sheer Raryoku the hierarchy of the espada must now look like this. Original Starrk, Resurrection Yami, regular Starrk, Baraggan, the rest of the espada, base Yami, and that definitely makes sense to me. It'll never not be a hard pill to swallow that Resurrection Yami has the most Raryoku out of the current espada, but he does. He just has the ability to store spirit energy, essentially, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he can use it, as we see in his battle with the captains. The original version of Starrk is one of those Bleach mysteries that we will never actually get to see, again unless, of course, Los Lobos is essentially close to how that used to look. But the more we learn, the better, and this feels like a fairly crucial piece of the overall puzzle. While nothing is really confirmed, save for the original Starrk being way stronger than Baraggan, it's cool to note that there was a hollow out there who could threaten Aizen, one that Aizen himself was wary of. That's not to say that Aizen necessarily feared this hollow, but more that he felt he couldn't simply waltz right up to it like he did Baraggan and take control. And as said earlier, I definitely think you can feel Aizen's trepidation in their first meeting. Aizen is oddly downplayed in this scene, and this revelation gives it all a new meaning. As far as the aspects of death go, maybe Aizen did give Starrk number 1 simply because it represented his solitude well, but it does also feel like, especially after these new revelations, that Aizen recognised his power now as well. Alright guys, but that's it for the video. As always, I really do hope you enjoyed it. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. With these revelations, are you more content with Starrk being the Primera espada over Baraggan? Were you always happy with that ranking? Did Baraggan never stand a chance in your eyes? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. How does this work with the whole aspects of death discussion? And just how powerful do you think Starrk's original Vasto Lorde form was? Could it have defeated Aizen? Is it the strongest hollow in existence, at least in the source material anyway? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. As for me, I've always said that Starrk is underrated. His soul-splitting ability is one of the most broken powers in Bleach, and evidence of one of the deepest wells of Raryoku we have ever seen, and so I've always been happy with him being number 1, whether it's down to lethality, Reiatsu, or otherwise. But to be honest, this just further helps to solidify that fact. Starrk and his existence is really unlike any other hollow we've ever seen in the series before. As always, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you took something of value away from it as well. And as always, I want to end the video by giving a massive shout out and saying a huge thank you to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without whom I wouldn't be able to do this. Your support means the absolute world to me. And if you like what I do here over on YouTube and you too want to take that support for me another step further, then you can visit the link down in the description to find my Patreon. Supporting me at the $1 a month tier will get your name in the credits of every single video I release just like this. And at the $2 tier or higher, you can enjoy all of my videos absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Okay, everyone, once again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.